They talk about loyalty like it's a badge of honor. But nobody tells you what it does to the ones who live long enough to remember everything. When Tupac Shakur became immortal, the world chose a frozen image. A raised fist. A fearless stare. A voice that never aged. But the men around him kept aging. They kept waking up. And one of them carried more than memories. He carried blame. Before the studios. Before the verses. Before the chaos that swallowed an entire generation. There was a man who never planned to be a rapper. Never chased applause. Never imagined his name would be tied forever to someone else's death. This is the story of Hussein Fatal. A protector in a culture that only remembers performers. A loyal soldier in a world that rewards survival, not sacrifice. He stood close to power. Close enough to feel its heat. Too close to escape when it exploded. When people ask why he couldn't move on, they miss the point. Some losses don't let you move forward. They follow you. They sit in the passenger seat. They wait. This is not a story about hip-hop. It is a story about what happens when loyalty outlives the man it was sworn to. Long before anyone knew his voice, people knew his presence. Hussein Fatal grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, in a house that was always full and never quiet. Too many mouths to feed. Too many personalities fighting for space. In neighborhoods like that, you learn early how to stand your ground without saying much at all. He wasn't the loud one. He was the one watching. In the early 80s, hip-hop played from car radios and bedroom speakers, but it wasn't a dream yet. Artists like Kool G Rap painted pictures of reality, not escape. Their music didn't promise success. It explained consequences. Fatal listened, absorbed it, but never chased the microphone. Rap was something people did. Survival was something he lived. Jobs were hard to find. Respect was easier to lose than earn. The streets offered fast money and faster trouble, and Fatal stepped into that world with eyes open. Not reckless. Calculated. Every move had a reason. Every alliance had a purpose. The most important one was Yaki Gaddafi. They weren't just friends. They were constant. Fatal was older, more grounded, and naturally became the shield. When situations turned ugly, he stepped forward. When emotions ran high, he stayed steady. That balance kept them alive more than once. At that point, Tupac Shakur was still just a name in conversation. A story? A rumor. Fatal didn't know about the blood connection between Tupac and Gaddafi. When he finally saw the photographs, the truth landed quietly. No celebration. No awe. Just recognition that the world was smaller than it seemed. When Gaddafi suggested visiting Tupac in prison, Fatal didn't go for opportunity. He went out of loyalty. Prison visits don't offer glamour. They offer reality. Cold rooms. Hard chairs. Long looks. Tupac didn't see a rapper walk in. He saw someone who had already been tested. When Tupac asked him to rap, Fatal didn't perform. He spoke. The words were rough. The delivery imperfect. But the energy was unmistakable. It wasn't about talent. It was about truth. And that was the moment everything shifted. Fatal didn't step into music because he believed in fame. He stepped in because someone he trusted saw value in who he already was. And once that door opened, there was no way back to being invisible. Power changes the room before it changes the people. When Tupac Shakur returned to the world, everything around him accelerated. Studios stayed open all night. Conversations turned strategic. Loyalty became currency. And Hussein Fatal found himself standing closer to influence than he ever intended. This was not fame as celebration. This was fame as pressure. Inside the Outlawz, roles formed naturally. Some chased the microphone. Some chased recognition. Fatal didn't chase anything. He positioned himself. Watching entrances. Reading moods. Measuring silence. That made him valuable. Tupac trusted people who didn't need to speak often. Fatal understood energy before language. When tensions rose, he didn't escalate. He absorbed. When egos clashed, he stayed grounded. That steadiness gave him influence without authority. Music became a byproduct of proximity. On tracks like All About You and When We Ride, Fatal's verses sounded unpolished because they were never meant to be performances. They were statements. His voice carried the weight of someone who lived the lyrics before recording them. There was no separation between persona and person. As the East Coast and West Coast conflict intensified, rooms grew heavier. Studio sessions felt like negotiations. Laughter ended quickly. Trust shortened. Fatal stood closer during those moments, not for recognition, but to make sure things didn't tip too far. He was never the face of aggression. He was the barrier before it reached the surface. But closeness to power brings exposure. Fatal's instincts, shaped by the streets, didn't always translate to celebrity environments. Weapons. Arguments. Split-second decisions that carried consequences. Tupac tried to manage it, sometimes sending Fatal away, hoping distance would restore balance. It never lasted. Because both men understood something others didn't. Their bond wasn't built on music. It was built on mutual recognition. Two men close in age, close in temperament, unwilling to bend easily. They fought like brothers. They respected each other like soldiers. At the height of Tupac's influence, Fatal stood within arm's reach of history. Not as a leader. Not as a follower. But as a constant presence in a world that rarely allowed stability. Standing that close to fire gives warmth. It also leaves marks. And those marks would soon become permanent. Some moments don't announce themselves. They wait quietly, then split a life in two. By September 1996, tension surrounded Tupac Shakur like a second shadow. Fame had sharpened everything. Loyalty. Paranoia. Anger. And for Hussein Fatal, instincts built for survival kept colliding with a world that demanded restraint. There were warnings. Arguments. Mistakes that carried weight. Moments where Tupac tried to pull him back, not out of punishment, but protection. Then came the court date. Fatal had to leave California and return to New Jersey to face an assault charge. It was routine. Unavoidable. Just another legal obligation. He didn't argue it. He didn't dramatize it. He left. Las Vegas happened without him. On the night of the Mike Tyson fight, Tupac Shakur was surrounded by people, cameras, and noise. But the one person Fatal believed would always be there was missing. The next day, Tupac was shot. For Fatal, time stopped moving forward and started replaying itself backward. Every decision rewound. Every fork in the road became a question. If I stayed. If I ignored court. If I was there. Survivor's guilt doesn't scream. It whispers. Relentlessly. Weeks later, the damage deepened. Yaki Gaddafi was shot and killed in New Jersey. Fatal had dropped him off shortly before it happened. The timing felt cruel, almost deliberate. Within 2 months, the two men who defined his adult life were gone. Grief collapsed inward. Music stopped meaning anything. Fame felt offensive. Sleep became irregular. Drugs filled the silence left by purpose. Fatal admitted later that he felt suicidal during this period. Not in dramatic moments. In quiet ones. When no one was watching. He didn't just lose brothers. He lost orientation. The world expected him to keep moving. To record. To perform. To explain. But grief doesn't follow schedules. And guilt doesn't fade just because the world demands productivity. Fatal didn't disappear because he was weak. He disappeared because surviving felt like a betrayal. The man built to stand guard was left guarding memories instead. And no amount of noise could drown out the one thought that never let him rest. I should have been there. America remembers tragedy in snapshots. A headline. A photograph. A moment frozen in time. After Tupac Shakur died, the country mourned loudly. Candlelight vigils. Magazine covers. Endless debates about violence, culture, and responsibility. His image became permanent, untouched by time. But the people closest to him kept aging. For men like Hussein Fatal, grief was not symbolic. It was daily. It didn't arrive with music montages or tribute specials. It showed up in empty rooms, unanswered phone calls, and long stretches where nobody asked how he was doing. To mainstream America, the Outlawz were background figures, often reduced to stereotypes. Angry, dangerous, disposable. The complexity of loyalty, trauma, and survival rarely entered the conversation. The idea that these men were processing loss in real time never fit the narrative. In the music industry, the shift was faster and colder. Contracts moved. Albums were finished. Rights were reassigned. When the collaborative album Still I Rise was eventually released, Fatal's verses were removed. Not because of quality, but because ownership had changed. Business logic replaced human memory. To the public, it meant nothing. To Fatal, it confirmed everything. From a broader American perspective, his story echoes a familiar pattern. The survivor is expected to be grateful, to adapt, to keep producing. There is little patience for unresolved grief, especially when the survivor doesn't fit a clean redemption arc. Older Americans watching from a distance may recognize this rhythm. A generation lost to violence. Another expected to move on without support. The country honors symbols but struggles with people who remain complicated. Fatal didn't disappear because he lacked talent. He faded because America had already decided which story mattered. Tupac became a lesson. Hussein Fatal became a footnote. And footnotes are rarely asked to speak. In the years that followed, Hussein Fatal tried to live a smaller life. He became a father. He slowed his pace. He returned to music not to compete, but to remember who he was before everything broke. Albums came and went. Deals were signed and quietly faded. The industry had already shifted its focus. New sounds. New faces. Old grief no longer fit the schedule. Fatal kept recording anyway, releasing projects that carried more reflection than ambition. Music became a place to put what he couldn't say out loud. Behind the scenes, conflicts followed him. Legal issues. Financial disputes. Questions about royalties that never seemed to resolve cleanly. After his death, his sister spoke publicly, claiming money owed to him was withheld. When asked, one response cut deep. He was told that because he was gone, he was no longer considered an outlaw. That sentence said more than any headline ever could. On July 11, 2015, in the early hours of the morning, a speeding car crashed on Interstate 85 outside Atlanta. Hussein Fatal was ejected from the vehicle and died from his injuries. He was 38 years old. No final performance. No farewell speech. Just another life ending quietly, far from the moment that defined him. Fatal did not leave behind a perfect legacy. He left behind a human one. A man shaped by loyalty in a world that rarely protects those who give it fully. A survivor who never learned how to stop surviving. Someone who stood close to greatness and paid for it long after the lights went out. History will remember Tupac Shakur as immortal. But Hussein Fatal reminds us of something harder to face. That surviving the legend can be more painful than dying with it. If this story made you think about someone who carried weight in silence, share their name below. And if stories like this matter to you, stay with us. Some truths don't need noise to last.